Welcome to Tardisian Files, a show dedicated to reviewing and discussing aspects of one of the most loved and longest running British sci-fi shows. This podcast is a fan-led series where we pull together sources from all across Doctor Who's extended media, including the show itself, comics, audio stories, and novels. In this mini-series, we will be continuing our discussion on what if the Doctor hadn't met Donna Noble for a second time, and how this may affect the plot of Planet of the Ood. During our analysis of the plot lines, it becomes clear that some significant divergences in the timeline begin to take place during this adventure. We pick up where we left off, with the Doctor having just saved Caecilius's family in Pompeii. We briefly discussed how Donna Noble's absence from the storyline meant that the act of saving them had a much different impact on the Doctor's psyche. Instead of being convinced that he could save someone, he did it out of guilt, and to reward Quintus for helping him stop the pyrovals. Without a travelling companion to ground him, the Doctor's darker side is beginning to show itself much earlier in this timeline than in the original. Worse than that, he is also not seeing any negative repercussions of his actions because, so far, bending his own rules hasn't landed him in any danger, planting the dangerous seed in the Doctor's mind that he can in fact get away with manipulating time when and how he sees fit. The TARDIS draws him to the Ood Sphere in 4126, where he ventures out into the magnificent glaciers of the planet. In his mind, the 10th Doctor begins hearing a telepathic message, a mournful song getting louder and louder as he trudges across the ice. Unbeknownst to him, an Ood, designated Delta 50, has escaped from the nearby Ood Operations Facility, having just killed Mr. Bartle whilst under the influence of Red-Eye. The Doctor is drawn to the Ood, who recognises Delta 50 as the same species he had met on Croptool. Whilst trying to determine what happened, Delta 50 struggles to convey a message. The circle must be broken. The Doctor tries to urge the Ood to explain, but staggers back when the Ood rears up to attack, his eyes flashing red, before he finally dies from his wounds. The Doctor flashes back to his adventure on Croptool, remembering how the Ood on the base were all under the influence of the mind of the beast, whose possession had caused their eyes to change to a fierce glowing red. He begins going through the possibilities, and wonders if there are more Ood on this planet, and whether they are being influenced by another, stronger mind. At the Ood Operations Facility, time is playing out the same as it did in the original timeline, with Mr. Halpin arriving at the facility to step in for Mr. Bartle and to investigate the circumstances of his death. He's greeted by Dr. Ryder and Solana, head of PA at Ood Operations, and the three go over the footage of Mr. Bartle's death. Dr. Ryder explains to Solana that Red-Eye is an infection where the Ood eyes literally change colour and cause them to act uncharacteristically violent towards humans. Solana notices Mr. Halpin order a drink from his Ood Sigma, and inadvertently inquires about the nature of the liquid, believing it to be alcohol. He tells her it is apparently hair tonic, to help him regrow the hair he's lost from the stress over 5 years of working at Ood Operations. Solana then leaves to greet the new buyers of the Ood at the front gates of the facility. Meanwhile, the 10th Doctor has come across Ood Operations and intends to gain access to the building. In the absence of Donna Noble, instead of posing as a representative from a company, he decides instead to pose as a freelance scientific advisor to Ood Operations. I believe he would take this approach so as not to arouse any more suspicion by posing as a more obscure individual, and, as a freelancer, Ood Operations would likely not bother with the background checks as the psychic paper would likely show Solana that the Doctor was from one of Ood Operations' most trusted partner agencies. And so the Doctor is taken into the Ood Operations facility and witnesses Solana's sales presentation of the Ood. And during the Mixer event, like the original timeline, he accesses the computer systems to see that humanity have spread across several galaxies over the last 2 centuries, and that the Ood appear to be docile servants. He sneaks away from the event, and whilst exploring the facility, he witnesses the Ood being led from warehouse to warehouse, seeing them be whipped and abused by the security team. Like the original timeline, he notes how humanity hasn't changed much since the 21st century, noting how no matter how advanced they are, they will always resort to colonial period tactics of enslavement and occupation. However, without Donna to ground him and to point out that while there are those in humanity who will always be like this, there will always be those who oppose this imperialist view and will fight for the rights of other people. The Doctor's otherwise candid quip at humanity instead becomes a simmering pot of contempt for the humans currently occupying the Ood Sphere. Meanwhile, Mr. Halpin and Dr. Ryder have ventured down into Warehouse 15, where they check on the Ood brain. They believe that something is wrong with the Ood brain's telepathic dampener field. They are interrupted, however, by the 10th Doctor, who spotted them walking across the facility. Unlike in the original timeline, he decided to follow Mr. Halpin rather than avoiding him, and to find out what was so important about Warehouse 15. He introduces himself as a freelance scientific advisor. Mr. Halpin is initially hesitant about the 10th Doctor's presence, but Dr. Ryder quickly steps in, saying he reached out to the partner agency, requesting a consultant to be sent to the Ood Sphere to help them in their investigation. Satisfied, Mr. Halpin asks Dr. Ryder to report on the Ood brain. The Doctor looks over the handrail and sees what's down there. A giant brain surrounded by a ring of blue energy. He recognises the Ood brain as some sort of shared hive mind, but as he currently has no idea about the natural state of the Ood, he has no idea why the Ood have this second shared brain. He also thinks about what Delta 50 told him, the circle must be broken, and notes how the brain is enclosed in the energy field. Dr. Ryder states that the Ood brain's psychic field is the same, with no change. Mr. Halpin makes to leave, and Dr. Ryder takes the opportunity to give the Doctor a tour of the restricted areas of the facility, for consultation, as he justifies it, to Mr. Halpin. In this timeline, Solana does not contact Mr. Halpin about the Doctor failing to follow background checks, as she has more important things to do with entertaining the guests, and assumes that Dr. Ryder has taken care of everything. Dr. Ryder first takes the Doctor out to the shipping unit, and as they walk, the Doctor asks him more about the Ood brain, and why a low-level empathic species would even need a shared brain in the absence of a third element. Unlike the original timeline, where the Doctor was pursued by security agents, Dr. Ryder explains first that this shipping unit is the main export station for Ood across the human empire, and each unit contains dozens of Ood. As the Doctor inspects these containers, he doesn't notice Dr. Ryder fiddling with the locks on a nearby container. He invites the Doctor to continue, saying that all the answers the Doctor needs will be in the next warehouse, where the unprocessed Ood are. The Doctor hears the singing in his head become louder, and when they reach the cage holding the unprocessed Ood, he realises it's an empathic signal from them. He asks Dr. Ryder if he can hear the song, and the Doctor shakes his head, but confirms that the psychic energies given off by the Ood are much greater than the processed Ood. He approaches the Ood, who regard him warmly, as though he is known to them. He explains that the Doctor is wondering why they need the Ood brain, and convinces the nearest Ood to show him what he has concealed in his hands. It's a hindbrain. Upon seeing the hindbrain, the Doctor understands that Ood are born with a secondary brain which processes their emotions, hence why he can hear their song. And Ood Operations have enslaved the Ood by cutting off their hindbrains and stitching on a translator. Outraged, the Doctor turns on Ryder, demanding why he would continue working for the company if he knew about this all along. But Ryder then explains that he is an agent of Friends of the Ood, and he spent years working his way up to try and liberate the Ood. Before he can explain his plan, however, his communicator goes off on his wrists. It's Mr. Halpin. The Ood have all gone rabid. They've killed the visiting reps, and they're rebelling against the armed security and facility workers. Outside, the Doctor can hear the commotion. To his surprise, Dr. Ryder doesn't seem all that fazed by the rebellion. Instead, he turns to the Ood he's befriended, who place a hand on his head. He tells them that Mr. Halpin's plan is to destroy the Ood brain. He says he can stop him, but he needs the Ood outside to recognise him and the Doctor as their allies. Without warning, the natural Ood surround the two in a circle, and the Doctor hears their song change to one of peace and goodwill. He feels the shimmer of psychic energy around him as he and Dr. Ryder are surrounded by the Ood's psychic aura. Now they can move freely to Warehouse 15. The two make their way across the battlefield, seeing humans and Ood alike fall on the battlefield. The humans are putting up a fight, but the Ood are full of centuries worth of rage, and it fuels their hunger for retribution. Slowly but surely, the Ood are winning. As they make their way through the commotion, they hear a scream. Solana runs up to them saying that the Ood are out of control. Dr. Ryder explains to her that the Ood have been mistreated, and now their hive mind is compelling them to fight back. Solana looks at him, taken aback, but unlike in the original timeline, Dr. Ryder is able to convince her to help them. She accompanies Dr. Ryder and the Doctor to Warehouse 15. When they arrive, they see Mr. Halpin setting the charges on the time bombs placed around the Ood brain. Solana looks down at the Ood brain, horrified at the sight. Mr. Halpin explains to her that his family found it centuries ago and placed it inside a psychic dampening field in order to subjugate the Ood. He orders them to help him with the bombs, but they refuse, prompting him to turn a gun on them. Like the original timeline, Dr. Ryder proudly explains that it was he who weakened the field when they came in to check the Ood brain, declaring himself as a friend of the Ood, and that he had finally achieved his years-long plan to infiltrate and sabotage Ood operations once and for all. Unlike the original timeline, Dr. Ryder is not standing right at Mr. Halpin's side, so instead of pushing him into the Ood brain, Mr. Halpin fires a shot, grazing Dr. Ryder's shoulder. Solana, now even more horrified, grabs a nearby medpack and begins trying to help Dr. Ryder, seeing that her boss has gone well and truly mad. Before Mr. Halpin can shoot again, however, he's interrupted by Ood Sigma, offering him a drink. After scoffing at the notion, he notices he's unable to bring himself to pull the trigger again. Ood Sigma then offers him a drink again, at which point both he and the Doctor realise that the drink is not hair tonic like Mr. Halpin so believes. Ood Sigma explains that it is a Ood graft suspended in a biological compound. The Doctor knows exactly what this means, and watches almost gleefully as Mr. Halpin's face goes slack and he begins to pull off his scalp, revealing a fresh layer of healthy but alien skin beneath. Solana and Dr. Ryder watch in horror as tentacles form out of Mr. Halpin's mouth. When he looks up, Mr. Halpin's face is no longer that of the cruel, balding businessman he was, but that of an Ood. Solana stunned, asks Dr. Ryder if this was part of his plan too, accusing him of murder, but the Doctor explains that Ood Sigma never showed signs of red-eye because the Ood brain was showing Mr. Halpin mercy. Ood Sigma then confirms that now Mr. Halpin is Ood kind, he'll be looked after, and he will be taught better. With the Ood liberated and Ood operations collapsing, the Doctor makes to leave the Ood Sphere. In this timeline, both Solana and Dr. Ryder have survived and come out of it as better people. They intend to stay on the planet to help resettle the Ood and expose to the rest of the human empire the crimes of Ood operations, and to ensure that justice is served. The Doctor converses with Ood Sigma one more time before leaving. However, the Ood have a much different warning for him in this timeline: to be wary of the darkness inside himself, and the darkness that is coming for the universe. Shaken, the Doctor leaves the Ood Sphere. And there you have it. That was one possible scenario of how the events of Planet of the Ood would have played out differently if Donna Noble hadn't been present. There we see much more significant deviations in the timeline and in the Doctor's character development, prompting us to wonder, how may this affect his actions later on? If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and tell your friends. You can check out some of our other material on Spotify or on our Anchor page. And as always, see you next time for more episodes of Tardisian Files. See you then, everyone.